I've always believed that family meant something. That blood was thicker than water. That the sacrifices I made for over 4 decades would mean something to the people I cared for the most. I was wrong. My name is Richard Mitchell. I'm 63 years old, and until recently, I thought I'd built a life worth being proud of. A successful construction company that I started from nothing. A beautiful colonial-style home in a quiet suburb of Boston. And what I treasured most, 2 children who I thought respected the values of hard work and honesty that I tried to instill in them. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October when everything changed. The kind of perfect New England fall day that makes you grateful to be alive, crisp air, maple trees ablaze with color, the scent of wood smoke hanging in the air. I was in my home office, going through some paperwork for the business. After 40 years of building Mitchell Construction from the ground up, I was finally considering retirement. My son Michael had been working alongside me for 15 years, and my daughter Eliza handled the company finances. The succession plan seemed obvious and natural. I was about to head into the kitchen for a cup of coffee when I heard Eliza's voice drifting up from the back patio. She must have thought I was still at the job site in Cambridge. Her tone made me pause, hushed, urgent, conspiratorial. Not the voice of my dependable, level-headed daughter. No, listen to me, Dad's getting older. The Parkinson's is just starting, but it's there. His hands shake sometimes when he thinks no one's looking. I froze. I'd noticed the occasional tremor, but had been putting off seeing a doctor. Hearing my private fear spoken aloud sent a chill through me. He won't even realize what he's signing, I heard my daughter say on the phone. We just need to get the paperwork ready before Michael gets back from his trip to Denver. A week later, I sat across from Gerald Hoffman, my attorney of 30 years, staring at the documents he'd just placed in front of me. The betrayal I'd uncovered was worse than I could have imagined. But I was no longer the shocked, wounded father I'd been 7 days ago. Now, I had a plan. Are you absolutely certain you want to go through with this, Rich? Gerald asked, his weathered face etched with concern. Once we set these changes in motion, there's no going back. I thought about the secret meeting I'd witnessed between Eliza and Michael at the Starbucks near the office. I remembered the spreadsheets I'd found on Eliza's laptop showing years of systematic embezzlement. I recalled the phone call I'd overheard between my son and some lawyer I'd never heard of, discussing how to leverage my cognitive decline to seize control of the company I'd built with my own 2 hands. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied, picking up the pen. My hand was perfectly steady as I signed. I wasn't always a wealthy man. Far from it. I grew up in a 3-room apartment in Dorchester, the son of a dock worker and a waitress. My father's hands were permanently calloused, his back perpetually sore from loading and unloading cargo ships at Boston Harbor. My mother worked double shifts at a diner to help make ends meet. They taught me that nothing worthwhile comes easy. When I was 17, Dad suffered a devastating injury at work. A cargo container shifted unexpectedly, crushing his left leg. The company gave him a pitiful settlement and sent him on his way. I watched my proud father diminish, confined to a wheelchair, dependent on my mother and the meager disability checks that barely covered our rent. I dropped out of college after my freshman year when the money ran out. Got a job as a carpenter's apprentice, learning the trade from old-timers who knew how to build things to last. 16-hour days, 6 days a week. My hands blistered, then calloused. My muscles ached, then strengthened. At 23, I took out a loan and started my own one-man operation, focusing on high-quality renovation work in the older neighborhoods of Boston. I lived on ramen noodles and slept on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment to save every penny I could. The business grew slowly but steadily, one satisfied customer telling another, then another. I met Sarah when I was hired to renovate the Victorian townhouse she'd inherited from her grandmother in Beacon Hill. She was working as an art teacher at a private school, with a smile that lit up the dusty rooms and a laugh that made me forget my exhaustion. We were married 8 months later. The birth of Michael in 1985 was the happiest day of my life. I held that tiny, red-faced bundle and promised him silently that he would never know the hardships I'd faced. Eliza followed 2 years later, completing our family. Sarah cut back to part-time teaching, and I worked even longer hours to give them everything they needed. By the time the kids were in elementary school, Mitchell Construction had 15 employees and a solid reputation for quality craftsmanship. We moved from our starter home to a larger house in Newton. I made sure we lived well within our means. The lessons of my childhood ran too deep for me to ever feel comfortable with extravagance or debt. Sarah and I saved aggressively for the kids' college funds. We took modest vacations, camping trips to Maine, a rented beach house on Cape Cod for a week each summer. We hosted neighborhood barbecues and cheered at countless soccer games and dance recitals. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was a good one, built on love and mutual respect. When Sarah was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2002, our world tilted on its axis. The next 3 years were a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, brief remissions followed by devastating recurrences. I scaled back my work hours to care for her, to be by her side through every treatment, every setback, every small victory. Michael was in college by then, and Eliza was in her senior year of high school. They both showed such strength during that difficult time. Michael would drive home from UMass every weekend to be with his mother. Eliza would sit for hours at Sarah's bedside, reading her favorite poems or just holding her hand. When we lost Sarah in 2005, I thought the grief would destroy me. But I had 2 children who needed me, and a company with 30 employees who depended on the work for their livelihoods. So I did what I'd always done. I got up each morning, put one foot in front of the other, and kept going. In the years that followed, the business continued to thrive. We expanded into commercial construction, securing contracts for office renovations and restaurant build-outs throughout Greater Boston. Michael joined the company after graduating with his business degree, bringing fresh ideas and energy. Eliza completed her accounting degree and took over the financial side of operations. I was proud of what we'd built together, not just a successful business, but a legacy. A family business that stood for something, that treated clients and employees with respect, that did quality work without cutting corners. Or so I thought. The first hint that something wasn't right came about 6 months ago. I was reviewing some invoices when I noticed discrepancies in our materials purchasing. The amounts being paid to suppliers didn't match the materials I knew we needed for our current projects. When I asked Eliza about it, she smiled and brushed it off. "Dad, you don't need to worry about these details anymore. That's why you have me, remember? We've just changed some of our purchasing processes to improve cash flow. It's all accounted for." I let it go, telling myself that micromanaging was a bad habit I needed to break if I was ever going to successfully transition leadership to my children. But something about her dismissive tone lingered with me. A few weeks later, I overheard Michael on the phone with someone, discussing a property in Beacon Hill, a major renovation project I knew nothing about. "Yeah, we're keeping this one off the main company books," he said in a low voice. "It's part of the new LLC. Dad doesn't need to be involved." When I asked him about it later, he claimed it was a small side project he was consulting on, nothing that would interfere with his Mitchell Construction responsibilities. Again, I chose to believe him. But the incidents kept accumulating. Suppliers calling to ask why we'd switched to lower-grade materials when our contracts specified premium products. A longtime client mentioning a significant price increase that I hadn't authorized. An employee accidentally copying me on an email about a special compensation arrangement for certain projects. I started paying closer attention, but subtly. I didn't want to accuse my children of anything without proof. They were adults with their own lives and responsibilities. Michael had 2 kids of his own now, and Eliza was engaged to a commercial real estate developer named Ryan. Perhaps I was just being an old-fashioned micromanager, struggling to let go of control. Then came that Tuesday in October, and Eliza's damning words on the patio, "He won't even realize what he's signing." After she left, I went straight to her home office down the hall. We still lived in the same house after Sarah died. I couldn't bear the thought of rattling around alone in that big space filled with memories. Eliza had moved back in with me, claiming it made sense financially while she saved for her own place. Michael and his family lived about 20 minutes away in Wellesley. I knew Eliza's password, she'd used the same one for years, Sarah's birthday followed by her initials. Not very secure, but I'd never had reason to mention it before. Now I was grateful for her lapse in cybersecurity. What I found made my blood run cold. A separate set of books for Mitchell Construction, showing systematic diversion of funds. Inflated supplier invoices with the differences being siphoned off to a separate account. Projects completed with substandard materials while charging clients for premium options. And most disturbing of all, a document titled Succession Plan that detailed how to leverage my declining health to transfer controlling interest of the company to Michael and Eliza. There was an email chain between them discussing the cognitive decline they'd supposedly observed in me. Incidents I had no memory of because they'd never happened. Forgotten conversations that had never occurred. Missed appointments that had never been scheduled. They were building a case to declare me incompetent. To take everything I'd built. I felt physically ill. My hands shook as I carefully logged out of her computer, making sure to leave everything exactly as I'd found it. I went to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed Sarah and I had shared for 20 years, trying to make sense of what I'd discovered. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath the shock and pain, another emotion was building. Determination. I hadn't built a successful business from nothing by being easily defeated. I hadn't survived losing the love of my life by giving up when things got tough. I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew I could trust. Gerald? It's Rich Mitchell. We need to talk. Not at your office. Can you meet me somewhere private? Today. Gerald Hoffman and I went back decades. He'd handled the legal side of my business since I incorporated in the late 80s. He'd helped draft my partnership agreement with Sarah, had created our wills, had guided us through every major business decision. More than my attorney, he was my friend. We met at a small Irish pub in a town 20 miles outside Boston, a place neither of us had any connection to. I didn't want to risk being seen by anyone who might report back to Michael or Eliza. Jesus, Rich, you look like hell, Gerald said as he slid into the booth across from me. His silver hair was thinner than the last time I'd seen him, his face more lined, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. I feel like hell, I replied, pushing my barely touched beer aside. Then I told him everything, the financial discrepancies I'd noticed, the conversations I'd overheard, and finally, the damning evidence I'd found on Eliza's computer. Gerald listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I don't even know what to say, Rich. Your own children. After everything you've done for them. I need to know my options, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Legally, where do I stand? Gerald sighed heavily. It's complicated. The good news is that you're still the majority shareholder of Mitchell Construction. The company bylaws we drafted give you controlling interest. As long as you're deemed competent, they can't force you out. And if they try to prove I'm not competent? That's where it gets tricky. Massachusetts has strict laws about conservatorship, but if they've been documenting supposed incidents of cognitive decline, they could petition the court. It would come down to medical evaluations, testimony from people who know you, evidence of your ability or inability to manage your affairs. So I need to get ahead of this. Exactly. Gerald pulled out a small notebook and began writing. First step, we get you to a neurologist, the best in Boston. Get a complete cognitive workup that proves you're fully competent. We document that officially. I nodded. What else? We need to secure the evidence of their financial misconduct. That's your leverage. And we need to do it without tipping them off that you're onto them. We spent the next 2 hours outlining a plan. Gerald would connect me with a forensic accountant who specialized in cases of corporate fraud. I would discreetly gather evidence of the financial irregularities without alerting Michael or Eliza. And most importantly, I would pretend that nothing had changed, that I was still their unsuspecting father, gradually stepping back from the business, occasionally exhibiting the small signs of aging they'd been so eager to exaggerate into dementia. One more thing, Gerald said as we prepared to leave. You need to update your estate plan immediately. If they're willing to go this far, who knows what else they might try. I thought about the life insurance policy that still listed them as equal beneficiaries. The will that left them everything, split equally between them. The power of attorney documents that would give them control over my medical decisions if I became incapacitated. You're right, I said. Let's make those changes first. A week later, I sat in Gerald's office, signing the revised documents. My hands were steady, my mind clear. The neurologist had found no signs of Parkinson's or any other cognitive impairment. Just a healthy man in his 60s with slightly elevated blood pressure, understandable given the circumstances. My new will left 75% of my estate to a charitable foundation to be established in Sarah's name, focused on supporting arts education in public schools. The remaining 25% was divided between my sister's children, nieces and nephews who had always shown me genuine affection and respect. Mitchell Construction would be sold upon my death or retirement, with the proceeds going to the foundation. My power of attorney now designated my sister, Karen, as my healthcare proxy. And my life insurance policy was changed to benefit the foundation. It was a start. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. For the next 3 months, I played the role of my life. I became the gradually declining father they wanted to see. I'd occasionally misplace my reading glasses or forget a minor detail about a project, little things that they'd seize upon as evidence, exchanging knowing glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Meanwhile, I was methodically building my case. The forensic accountant Gerald recommended, a sharp-eyed woman named Teresa Valdez, uncovered layer after layer of financial misconduct. Not just at Mitchell Construction, but in Michael and Eliza's personal finances as well. Michael had leveraged the company's reputation to secure loans for personal real estate investments, house flipping projects in gentrifying neighborhoods that were technically separate from the company but used our resources, our subcontractors, our materials. He'd even used company funds as down payments, disguising them as business expenses. Eliza's manipulations were even more brazen. She'd been systematically increasing her own salary and bonus structure without board approval, the board consisting of Michael, herself, and me. She'd created phantom vendor accounts that funneled payments to her personal accounts. And most disturbing of all, she'd been gradually transferring small ownership stakes in the company to her fiancé Ryan's holding company through a complex series of transactions designed to stay under the radar. Working with Teresa and Gerald, I documented everything. Bank statements, transfer records, falsified board minutes, altered contracts. We built an airtight case that would stand up to the most rigorous legal scrutiny. I also installed monitoring software on my home office computer and Eliza's laptop, not to spy on her personal communications, but to capture evidence of business fraud. It was Gerald who suggested this, assuring me it was legal given that these were company devices used for company business, and I was still the majority owner. It was through this monitoring that I discovered their timeline. They planned to make their move at the annual board meeting in April, just 2 weeks away. They had already drafted the documents that would force me into a consulting role with no actual authority. They'd prepared medical documentation from a doctor I'd never met, attesting to cognitive decline they'd observed during consultations that had never happened. The night I discovered this, I sat alone in my darkened home office, a glass of Sarah's favorite scotch in my hand. On the wall hung a photo of the 4 of us, Sarah, Michael, Eliza, and me, taken on a family vacation to Maine the summer before Sarah's diagnosis. We were standing on a rocky beach, arms around each other, squinting into the sun, smiling without reservation. What would you tell me to do, Sarah? I whispered to the empty room. There are children. Our babies. How did we go so wrong? I knew what she would say. Sarah had been compassionate but never weak. She believed in second chances but also in consequences. And above all, she believed in truth. The truth was that my children had become people I no longer recognized. Perhaps it had happened gradually, so slowly I hadn't noticed the changes. Perhaps the seeds had always been there, and I'd been too blinded by love to see them. It didn't matter now. What mattered was that they were adults who had made calculated decisions to betray me, to steal what I'd spent a lifetime building, to use my love against me. I finished my scotch and made my decision. There would be no gradual transition of power. No generous inheritance despite their betrayal. No covering up their misdeeds to preserve family harmony or company reputation. There would be justice. And it would be served cold. The annual board meeting of Mitchell Construction was traditionally held in the conference room of our company headquarters in Watertown. A modest space with a long oak table I'd built myself when we first moved into the building 15 years ago. But this year, at my suggestion, we were holding the meeting at Gerald's law office downtown. I'd claimed I wanted a more formal setting since we'd be discussing my transition to retirement. Michael and Eliza had exchanged those knowing glances again, clearly believing this played perfectly into their plans. They arrived together, dressed impeccably, Michael in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than I'd spent on clothes in the past 5 years combined, Eliza in a sleek gray dress and pearls that had belonged to her mother. I felt a pang, remembering how Sarah had worn those pearls only on special occasions, treating them with reverence though they weren't particularly valuable. "Dad, you're early." Eliza kissed my cheek, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "How did you get here? You should have called me for a ride." The subtle implication that I might be unable to transport myself safely wasn't lost on me. I took an Uber, I lied smoothly. In fact, I'd been at Gerald's office since 7 a.m., finalizing preparations. "Great, that's great," Michael said, clapping me on the shoulder with just a touch too much force. "Safety first, right? Especially with the traffic downtown." Gerald welcomed us into the large conference room, where Teresa Valdez was already seated, her laptop open, a stack of folders in front of her. I'd told Michael and Eliza that she was a financial consultant helping with the retirement transition. "Shall we get started?" Gerald asked, closing the door. "I believe we have a full agenda today." Michael cleared his throat, shooting a quick glance at Eliza before speaking. "Actually, before we get into the standard agenda items, Eliza and I have something important we'd like to discuss." "By all means," I said, leaning back in my chair. "The floor is yours." Michael launched into a clearly rehearsed speech about my decades of dedication to the company, my well-earned retirement, and the need for a clear succession plan. His voice was full of practiced concern as he transitioned to his talking points about my health challenges and occasional confusion that had been worrying the family. Eliza picked up seamlessly, sliding a document across the table toward me. "We've drawn up a new corporate structure that transitions you to Chairman Emeritus. You'll retain your equity stake and profit sharing, of course, but the day-to-day operations and decision-making would shift to Michael as CEO and me as CFO." I didn't touch the document. Instead, I looked from Michael to Eliza, taking in their expectant expressions, the barely concealed triumph in their eyes. "Before I consider this proposal," I said calmly, "I'd like to address some concerning financial discrepancies that have recently come to my attention." Their expressions froze. I nodded to Teresa, who distributed copies of a thick report to everyone at the table. "Ms. Valdez is not just a financial consultant. She's a forensic accountant who specializes in corporate fraud investigations. She spent the last 3 months conducting a thorough audit of Mitchell Construction's finances." Michael's face flushed dark red. "What the hell is this?" "You had no right." "I have every right," I cut him off, my voice sharp. I'm still the majority owner of this company, despite your efforts to change that through falsified documents and fraudulent transactions. Eliza had gone very pale, her eyes fixed on the report in front of her. She knew exactly what it contained. For the next 45 minutes, Teresa methodically walked us through her findings. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. Multiple instances of embezzlement, unauthorized transfers, falsified board minutes, tax fraud, the creation of shadow companies to siphon off contracts and resources. When she finished, the room was dead silent. "What's your explanation?" I asked quietly. Michael attempted bluster. "This is ridiculous. These are legitimate business operations that you weren't involved in because you've been stepping back. You're misinterpreting standard financial practices because you don't understand modern business methods." "Is that so?" I pushed another folder toward him. "Perhaps you can explain these, then. Emails between you and Eliza discussing how to leverage my cognitive decline to take control of the company. Documentation from a Dr. Patel about my supposed symptoms, a doctor I've never met. Plans for today's meeting where you would present me with documents transferring control under the guise of a generous retirement package." Eliza's composure cracked. "Dad, it's not what it looks like. We were just trying to protect the company. You have been forgetting things, making mistakes." "Like what, Eliza? Give me one concrete example." She faltered, looking to Michael for support. "The Peterson contract," he said quickly. "You completely forgot the meeting with them last month." "There was no Peterson meeting last month," I replied evenly. "The meeting was postponed by Alan Peterson himself because his daughter was getting married. I have the email exchange right here." I slid yet another document across the table. One by one, I dismantled every example they tried to provide of my supposed decline. Meetings that had never been scheduled. Conversations that had never happened. Mistakes that had been manufactured. "I've also had a complete neurological workup," I added, producing the medical report. No signs of Parkinson's, dementia, or any cognitive impairment whatsoever. Michael's bluster had given way to a cold calculation I recognized all too well. He was already thinking about damage control, exit strategies, ways to minimize his losses. Eliza had tears streaming down her face now. "Dad, please. We can explain. We can fix this." "It's too late for that," I said, feeling a bone-deep weariness. "Here's what's going to happen now. Gerald has prepared 2 options for each of you." Gerald distributed the final set of documents, severance agreements that included confidentiality clauses and releases of all claims against Mitchell Construction. "Option 1, you both resign from Mitchell Construction immediately. You forfeit all shares in the company. You return all misappropriated funds, which Teresa has calculated to the penny. You sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements. In return, I don't press criminal charges for fraud, embezzlement, or conspiracy." I paused to let that sink in. "Option 2, you refuse these terms, and we take this entire file to the district attorney's office this afternoon. Based on Teresa's preliminary assessment, you're each looking at felony charges that carry potential prison sentences of 5 to 10 years. Michael's jaw clenched. "You wouldn't do that to your own children." "My own children wouldn't have done this to me," I replied, my voice finally betraying some of the pain I felt. "My own children wouldn't have stolen from the company their mother and I sacrificed everything to build. My own children wouldn't have conspired to declare me incompetent so they could seize control of my life's work. We made mistakes," Eliza sobbed. "But we're still your family." "Family doesn't do what you've done," I said quietly. "You have until 5 p.m. today to decide. Gerald will be here to receive your signed agreements or to accompany me to the DA's office." I stood up, suddenly unable to bear being in the same room with them any longer. "I've already cleared out my personal belongings from the house. Eliza, you have 30 days to find another place to live, the terms are in the agreement. The locks have been changed at the office. Your access cards and company credit cards have been deactivated. I walked to the door, then turned back for one final look at the children Sarah and I had raised, had loved unconditionally, had trusted completely. I don't know when exactly you decided that what I built wasn't enough for you. That taking was easier than earning. That I was nothing more than an obstacle to your ambitions. But I want you to know this, I would have given you everything. All you had to do was wait, work hard, and be worthy of it. Then I walked out, leaving them with the wreckage of what they'd destroyed. By 4:30 that afternoon, both Michael and Eliza had signed the severance agreements. I wasn't surprised. They'd always taken the easiest path available, and prison time certainly wasn't easy. In the weeks that followed, I sold Mitchell Construction to Daniels & Sons, a respected family-owned construction company with values similar to those I tried to instill in my own business. The sale price was substantial, more than enough to fund the Sarah Mitchell Foundation for arts education for decades to come. I moved out of the Newton house with its painful memories and bought a small, modern condo overlooking Boston Harbor. Floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the space with light. No clutter, no excess, nothing I didn't need or use regularly. Karen, my sister, was my rock during this time. She'd always seen through Michael and Eliza's charm to the entitlement beneath, though she kept her concerns to herself out of respect for me. Now, she helped me rebuild my life, introducing me to her circle of friends, making sure I didn't isolate myself with my pain and disillusionment. It was at one of Karen's dinner parties that I met Helen, a retired literature professor with a quick wit and kind eyes. We started slowly coffee dates, walks along the harbor, long conversations about books and ideas and the complicated relationships between parents and children. She'd raised a daughter on her own after her husband left when the girl was just 3. Her daughter was now a public defender in Chicago, something Helen spoke of with quiet pride. 6 months after the board meeting that had changed everything, I received a letter from Eliza. She was living in Rhode Island now, working as an accountant at a small firm. She'd broken off her engagement to Ryan. The letter was full of apologies, explanations, pleas for forgiveness and reconciliation. I read it twice, then put it away in a drawer without responding. Perhaps someday I would be ready to hear her out, to consider rebuilding some kind of relationship. But not yet. The wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too profound. Michael never reached out. According to Karen, who still heard neighborhood gossip from her friends in Wellesley, he'd moved his family to California. He was working for a real estate development company owned by his wife's father. Starting over, I supposed, though I doubted he'd learned any meaningful lessons from what had happened. As for me, I was learning to live with the contradictory truths that now defined my life. That I had been both a successful businessman and a failed father. That the children I'd loved so completely had been plotting my downfall. That the legacy I'd worked so hard to build would now benefit strangers instead of my own flesh and blood. But I was also discovering new truths. That it's never too late to start over. That there are honest, decent people in the world who value integrity over easy profit. That a man in his 60s can find new purpose, new connections, perhaps even new love. Last week, I attended the inaugural grant ceremony for the Sarah Mitchell Foundation. We awarded funding to 5 public schools in Boston's most underserved neighborhoods, enabling them to restore arts programs that had been cut due to budget constraints. Sitting in the auditorium, watching the faces of the teachers and students as they described what these programs meant to them, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. Sarah would have loved seeing her name associated with bringing art back into children's lives. She would have approved of how things had turned out, painful though the journey had been. As I left the ceremony, Helen took my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You did good, Rich," she said softly. Sarah would be proud. And for the first time since I'd heard my daughter's voice on that October afternoon, he won't even realize what he's signing. I believed that maybe, just maybe, I had done the right thing after all. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.